Hey everyone, this is Lucas Bagno, an investor at Village Global, and I'm here with my co-host Ian Cinnamon. Welcome to Solarpunk.
In this podcast, we cover topics related to space and defense and discuss how technology can contribute to a better and safer world.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global Solarpunk. We're really excited to have Ben Van Roo with us today on the show to do a deep dive on SBIRs. Ben is the CEO and co-founder of Yurts Technologies, an application development platform for large AI models. Prior to Yurts, Ben built the national security team at Primer Technologies and was a national security policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lucas. I appreciate it.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you. We've had many conversations with different folks over the last couple months about SBIRs and government contracting and all of those topics. But you have written some amazing blog posts that so many people in the industry were chatting as you dove deep into SBIRs and all the data as it pertains to it. So maybe to kick us off, could you please give us, just a broad overview for those who don't know of what SBIRs are, what is their purpose, their history, and who benefits from them?
Yeah, well, happy to. The SBIR program is a government-funded small business and innovation research is the acronym, and it has a sister program called the Small Technology Transfer and Research. That's the STTR, which is more oriented towards academia, joint partnerships with industry. But the SBIR program itself is really trying to allocate small portions of different federal agencies' dollars towards small business. It was born out of the NSF in the mid-70s. There were some really interesting wins that they got right away in the late 70s. I think the gene for cystic fibrosis was discovered, and the Human Genome Map, a company that discovered that, received SBIR dollars. So in the 80s, Reagan memorialized it. It became fully funded. Today, there's 11 agencies that participate in the SBIR program. About a little under 50% of those dollars that are in the SBIR program are DoD focused, which is part of obviously the conversation today. And what it is it's about $3 billion ish total. I would say $1.5 billion, roughly, comes out of the DoD's budget, targeting small businesses for innovative research. Now, that's kind of a blanket statement because we'll obviously dive into it more, but it means many things to many people. Foundationally, it was really started on very early research in how the NSF uses it, but in the DoD today, which is, again, the largest customer or the largest allocator of dollars, it can be used for many things. And so what we saw in the work that I did, I really was trying to understand where the dollars were going, who was winning the dollars, who was being awarded these dollars, and why. And so what my main focus of the work that I did was really focused on the DoD side of the SBIR program, not on what NSF, DOE, HHS, others were doing. And so, the program just so happened to be, when I was doing the research and the writing that I did, up for reauthorization. So some of it was just kind of a timely analysis. And then, some of my journey, it took on a little bit of a life of its own.
Amazing. So before we dive deeper into it, can you just say briefly, what do you think should be the goal of those SBIR of the SBIR program? Specifically, let's dive in specifically with regards to the DoD.
Yeah. So, obviously I'm a biased person. I have a small business. I am applying to some of the SBIR awards that will be coming out. But objectively, when I look at the SBIR program, I think a lot of the agencies outside of the DoD have done a pretty good job with its original purpose. They're grant dollars that help fund innovative research that potentially can be transitioned to real companies. Within the DoD itself, it's taken on a bit of a different life. And this is kind of when I say that it means everything to everyone and nothing to everyone. some people still think it's for fundamental research. And so there are questions of, does that augment the national labs? Some people think we're protecting the manufacturing, the defense manufacturing base. And I would definitely argue that is not the case. And that is not necessarily happening with the way that the dollars are being awarded today. Some think it's really about transitioning dual use technology. And you see with the growth of things like AFWorks and Open Topic, and then all the subsequent agencies that are participating in something like that, it's a little bit, they pitch it a little bit more on transitioning technologies and bringing new commercial technologies in. And then there's another group that just think, hey, this is discretionary funds. There are MAGCOMs that spend dollars. They want to use it for X, or a program manager wants to use it for Y. Let's do that. And so that's me avoiding the question. What do I think should be used for? I think we're at a really unique time in our history as a nation. I think for the DoD in particular, the very nature of war is shifting. And I think that's completely unfolding in Ukraine right now, away from large platforms. And I mean, this has not been an overnight shift, but it's just brought onto iPhone cameras and Twitter more for the entire world to see. We're looking less at large, exquisite platforms, big garrison-style bases. The idea of projecting power it's very different over the next 20, 30, 40 years than what it has been in the past. And so when I think about it as try to think about the strategy, I say, okay, so that world's different. Commercial sector has far, far outpaced the defense sector in terms of technology innovation. And and then the third thing is we have a really slow bureaucracy in the defense world. I try to stay away from talking about the PPBE cycle in any of my blogs, because it's very cumbersome. It's robust. I mean, there was a memo that the working group from PPBE talking about reform of acquisition wrote, which basically says we're going to keep meeting and thinking about reform. So that in and of itself says, like, okay, this is we are not changing the bureaucracy at whole. So I think, frankly, we have a weird and interesting opportunity where a lot of companies in the commercial sector are looking to either get involved with the government because they see how the world is unfolding and they want to take a more active role. Frankly, they need different forms of revenue because venture capital isn't necessarily as available to them as it was in the past. Or they, are just building technologies that lend themselves well to the defense world. But how do they get involved? That's pretty hard today. It's pretty hard to engage. And the SBIR could be a unique step in that process. You had Trey Stevens on one of your earlier podcasts, and he looked at SBIRs and it's like, look, people are going to get a little bit of money from SBIRs and they're going to think they have these huge defense contracts, and that's like absolutely the wrong mindset. And he's right. He's absolutely right. All the math and all the analysis says just because you get a phase one, and even if you get a phase two, the likelihood that you're going to get a big contract on the other side of it is essentially zero. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the mechanism a little bit better to boost those odds of innovative technologies coming into the DoD.
Awesome. And maybe for those that don't know, could you dive deeper and explain the difference between phase one, phase two, and phase three? And also, tell the listeners, what are the odds for these companies applying for SBIRs in the first place? And what do companies generally have to do in order to apply?
So phase one is depending on the agency, it's about a 6 month to a year term where you fill out an application. In theory, you can get what are called letters of support, people to kind of vouch for the interest in this technology or software or platform. Maybe you have to describe your commercialization of how you're making money outside of it. You'll find out over a period of time. You get 6 months to basically do business development and find more customers and find product market fit is a strong word, but to try and find end uses of how would the DoD really want this. In general, kind of what I advocate for is that the phase ones where they're $50,000, that doesn't do a lot for anyone. Where some agencies do larger phase ones, $250,000, that's a little bit more. But there are reasons why I actually don't think that phase is even useful in the future. Phase two is a longer term contract. It's usually about a year to 2 years. You get about something like $750,000 to $1.5 million. There have been some exceptions. And think of that more as you're really trying to demonstrate to particular customers that this is a very viable technology and meaningful. What's required in that process? Again, it's an application that you have to get accepted, and also things called MOUs, memorandum of understandings, for people, preferably people that are going to be buying the technology can really say, hey, we really need this. This is important to us. Phase 3 is really, think of it more as like a hunting license. It means you can go after really big, larger contracts and program of records. Now, what Trey touched on is that getting through all those phases into phase 3 larger contracts, it's nearly impossible. And I would argue especially for software companies, so people that have software plays only, it's even more hard. So, it's harder for Palantir to get on a program of record than an Anduril. And I would, I can think of a handful of companies on my, that I know that were pure software plays that have gotten program of records, phase 3 contracts, big dollars. So what does that mean? It means that you're scoped by about roughly, how much money you could expect in the SBIR program you could win. I did a little bit of a kind of a cost accounting calculator for companies that want to get a phase 1 or phase 2 and think about the different cost structures that it might mean for them. And it is to say that, like, yes, $1.5 million is a lot of money for a lot of small companies, but what you have to put into it and what you can expect out of it, you really need to weigh that trade-off versus going in other directions. And so, kind of the overarching theme is, even in the best case scenarios that you can win these contracts, and we can talk about the tactics, it's not going to be your path to make your company a unicorn by any stretch of imagination. Now, to make matters a little bit worse, and we can have more positive side of the conversation, I spent a decent amount of time looking at who was actually winning these contracts and what are the conditions that are that improve your company's chances of winning. And one of the things we would talk about is there's a small number of companies that are actually taking a large amount of this pie each year just to refund their companies and their activities. So what does that mean for the average small tech company out here that doesn't necessarily have deep DoD roots? It means, right off the bat, you're not fighting for the same pie that you are being marketed. You're looking at something much smaller. And then to make matters a little bit more complicated is to really boost your odds of winning. If you don't have direct connections into the DoD, you often would want to consider using some advisory firm, and that costs money on top of your own time and energy and applications. So it is to say that, frankly, I looked at, in my analysis, I saw easily 30% to 40%, depending on how you want to talk about, or 50% of the total dollars allocated each year go to the top 1 to 10% of firms that are just engaging every year in, year out. So there goes half the pie. If you want to engage with an advisory firm, that's, they're going to take about another 20 to 30%, maybe even more, of the total dollars for people that they represent. And so now it's not that huge of a pie for you and your firm to go after these dollars. And then also we discount the fact that, you don't necessarily, you're not going to make a ton of money on the other side of it. And so, and it's not to be glum, but what I was trying to do was understand and paint the picture of just like, this is actual reality. We have the data, we can look at it. So let's be really thoughtful of when and why all of these tech companies would want to try to engage with the DoD. And so that, that's kind of a lot of the genesis of the work that I did, was to just at least say, let's have an honest conversation about where we are at.
Great. Well, there's so many directions that we can take this, but before we go deeper, I want to go back to something that you said that I don't think that anybody else on the show has brought up before, which is that you believe that it's a lot harder for these software first companies to get these contracts, get a program of record, and even go through the SBIR process than more hardware focused companies. Why do you think that is? And would be great if we could give a couple of examples.
Well, I think why that is in part because defense has, in general, been about buying, building, buying, sustaining different types of weapon systems. So aircraft carriers, F-16s, different types of artillery and tanks. That's the way that war was fought. It wasn't necessarily fought to the a large extent with ones and zeros. I think the traditional budgeting pots of money go into R&D, and they go into acquisition, procurement dollars, and then sustainment. And the companies that made money really made sustainment dollars. And so you can buy you can buy a drone from whatever vendor X or drones, but you might their sustainment costs might far actually exceed the procurement costs. And so I think a little bit of it is an evolution of how we think about our relationship with the relationship between DoD and software providers specifically. I mean, it's not to say that AWS and Microsoft aren't doing exceedingly well, because they're doing just fine. But it is, as you think about what is a program of record for a software vendor, there are definitely examples of companies that have won big dollars and larger contracts, but it's just not as prevalent just yet. And so you have to think mindfully about how you're engaging and what are you trying to sell the DoD as a software vendor. So, and frankly, I think that they don't, there are new models that the DoD is trying to solicit and understand. Would you pay for managed service API clicks versus just buying an enterprise license for X? I think that those models are still being explored, where they're a little bit more prevalent in the commercial world today. So, I'm a software vendor. That's my company. My relationship with the defense world, is something that I'm just gonna have to kind of keep that in mind as well. How do I think about longer term relationships and contracts? And so, but this is where you see companies like Anduril, and we can bring them up. They will have great procurement contracts, but they're going to do better in sustainment. That's my anticipation.
Totally. And you mentioned that it's really hard to get these contracts. The odds for the smaller companies are not that great. Is the process at least pretty consistent and reliable? Do companies generally know what's going to happen and when?
This is where so things like the NSF are pretty interesting. And so again, when we talk about macro themes and we talk about small business and relationship between SBIR and the SBA and these small business, you really need to have a little bit of finer level of granularity. NSF, when you apply, they're very specific. It's a rolling window. You'll find out within days whether you pass the first gate. You can find out within a few months, usually, for sure, if you got kind of past the second, and then you're allotted a certain amount of dollars. So that's different than the DoD has primarily been a contracting SBIR dollars, and so it's more periodic. When solicitations come out, they're often for very specific things. So if you're a software vendor that's doing cool AI, versus a hypersonics vendor doing some really niche technology, it's unclear each quarter to quarter when a new SBIR kind of tranche should come out for the DoD or different parts of the DoD, whether either of those technologies that you have would be eligible to apply for an SBIR. And so that's just on the process of trying to engage with the Department of Defense. And so you think about, in the commercial world, when we think about customers coming to our site or customers downloading our app, businesses are the same way. They're going to come, they're going to explore it. Is there any value to them? And with the existing processes today, many companies would just walk away right away because there's nothing there. It's not a rolling application. It's not something that you can easily just come back to. So that's on that side. Now, if you're awarded dollars and the timing around that, now the DoD has been notoriously bad at time to letting you know that you've been awarded dollars and then time to even deliver those dollars. And there's a kind of rough GAO report looking at all these different the agencies and the services. about a year ago. I mean, I think there's reason to believe that that will improve, and focusing on quicker delivery of awards. It's something that even the Extension Act of 22 is trying to hone in on. But yeah, so from a reliability standpoint, you can sell a contract in the commercial sector to a large enterprise, and those can take 9 months to a year. But usually you don't have to also worry about like, wait, are they going to pay me for another 6 to 8 months or not? You have that figured out in the T's and C's right away. And so that's, in general, it's not great. There's not necessarily a lot of transparency and clarity, but I think there are reasons for that, and there are reasons to believe that that will change and get better.
On that note, can you share a little bit, what are some of your recommendations that you think could help make the process more reliable?
For the commercial sector and the dual use technologies that we'd like to see be brought into the Department of Defense, my assumption is not all, and in some cases not many, of these companies even know how to like fill out the forms that are required, which aren't hard in and of themselves, but the language is different. Doing some managerial accounting for your startup firm is, often suspect at best. And so what I'd like to see is the processes, the forms be simplified and demystified a bit for new entrants that are trying to participate in SBIR programs. Mind you, a very easy way to get disqualified is to just fill out some of the wrong numbers around your cost estimates and overhead. Sounds silly, but there's a lot of applications that come through the door, and the first screen is just how do you eliminate ones that are incomplete or seem a little bit off. Now, again, startups don't necessarily know how to do cost accounting because it doesn't make any sense, for their startup at a stage of 5 people and in a big AWS budget. So I would like to see the process demystified and simplified, a little bit of handholding, because like that's the important part. Is there are important parts of thinking about legality of your what you say that you're doing, and then there are not important parts. And I would argue that some of these areas are less important than trying to field really innovative technologies and people to engage with eventually, and turn into technologies for the warfighter. So, and I think I would make those types of changes. In the midterm, long term, finding better pathways for companies that don't have cleared engineers, that don't have a facility clearance, like, God forbid they have founders that participate in recreational activities that are not necessarily as aligned with DoD standards. I think we need to find better pathways for these companies to still inject their technologies into the defense world. DARPA just released, they're basically trying to address this very problem of how can you have sandboxes and how can you have technologies go into and be accessed by classified or for classified environments without spending 2 to 3 years to get clearances and facility clearances and that whole headache. So I think we need to remove barriers of friction is probably the summary of what I'd like to see overall. In terms of evaluating, I think a really big burden that will happen as part of the Extension Act is the great thing is that there's a thing we'll talk about, open topics that are out there that will encourage a lot of people to apply. The rough part about open topics is the actual review process and elimination process right now hasn't necessarily been funded in the same way that you would need to do to now evaluate lots of people that have lots of technologies. So how do you even have the right number of experts looking at all of these things when they're coming in the door? So there might be a little bit of bumpiness still, but eventually, like, you want to know, what I'd like to see is rolling open topics for any new innovative technology to come in the door. Just because you don't fit in one cycle in the year doesn't mean that you're not a great fit for the DoD and for our country. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a simplified process for many companies, a little bit more handholding for new emergents. And then there's a last thing, and I write a little bit about it. It would be very interesting to see much larger thematic type of requests for applications that fall into open topics. So areas, let's say hypersonics or counter UAS or AI, and just leave those as blankets, where longer term the PEOs, the program offices that are eventually going to be writing larger checks, are very, very aware of what's coming in the door at all times at the lower levels. So it's better connectivity to an end state, which might boost the number of phase threes, programs of records, et cetera, for these companies in the DoD. Less friction, there's faster terms, you have a shorter valley and smaller valley of death, and potentially a better path to an upside on the other side of it.
Amazing. So to go back to something that you said, one of your recommendations is to do more open topics. Can you explain what those are and why in particular they would be helpful?
Yeah, so they're, I think the birth of open topics was maybe in part to deal with some of the companies that are using and getting new money year in, year out, called, I call them the SBIR mills, others, that's kind of the refer to it. But it's also to really encourage new entrants to work with the DoD. And so why would you want to do that? You would do that when you believe that the DoD itself, as a collective, they don't necessarily know all of their requirements. They don't necessarily know all the cool technologies that exist out there. And it would be to, the idea of an open topic. Some of them are thematic, some of them are not, some of them are rolling, some of them are time bound, but it's at least to say like, hey, you want to participate and work with us, show us what you have. Now, this is very different than what is done today in many cases, not, definitely at SBIRs, but also in things like DIU, where the solicitations are extraordinarily specific. And so, again, if you're a company that wants to work with the DoD, you can come, you sign up on SAM, you're looking at all the websites, and there's just a lot of random one-off things that are highly customized, potentially either to a specific customer, or a specific vendor, or in one very specific area. And so like that won't bring more companies in the door that are saying like, hey, you should look at us and consider this new thing, where open topics opens the aperture a lot more for new entrants and new ideas.
Yeah, what I think is interesting that you're saying that comes to mind, it relates to the point that you said a while back, which is software companies don't necessarily work that way, right? Like a lot of hardware companies, sure, like you have the plan and you have, 3 years from now, you know exactly how much capital you're going to need. If you're just a software first company, you iterate a lot faster. And the deeply specific requirements are not necessarily how these companies think. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there are plenty of reasons why I would say prior to AFWorks' open topics, why this didn't make sense. And part of it is that, like, yes, software companies don't know and they move really fast and they iterate through product features fast. But it's also, just to be fair, up through 2017, 2018, there was a lot of blowback on working with the DoD. Specifically from software companies, large like Google or others that are small. It's a time when I was building a national security team at a software company. I mean, I saw all around me, which I personally thought was a little bit insane, not wanting to support the government. But again, I have a military family. I'm biased. Whatever, that's fine. So the part of the issue that we saw is that both sides weren't necessarily engaging the right way, whether it's how to think about procuring and sustaining and putting on programs of records, new software vendors, or just the software industry itself wasn't doing as much with the DoD. Now, fast forward to 2022, it's a very different world. And what I'm excited about open topics is I think we will see a lot of new companies wanting to engage with defense tech. And this is going to be the way, for good or for bad, this is going to be the way that companies can start that relationship with the DoD. Frankly, I was trying to push for more reforms, but because I think it's so important right now. I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to be wildly important for the next 100 years for our country. We didn't get all the reforms I was pushing didn't totally pan out. But I think there were some positive changes in open topics at an agency and service level. Forcing that to be more broadly adopted is going to be one such way.
Awesome. To dive a little bit deeper on the process of SBIRs, one of the things that's interesting is, there's no clear path to a program of record. How could the government help make that path clear?
Well, ultimately, I would say there's a little bit of it that like really, really good vendors in general break through and will sell in commercial sectors, or they will raise money such that companies will understand, or venture capitalists will understand that there's going to be a very large demand for this. And so SBIR doesn't have to be the only path to program of record. There are things like In-Q-Tel and DIU. There are different types of contracting mechanisms like OTAs that can help get you there. The positive steps that I think people are that we've seen more recently, there are contracts that are after the phase 2 that are called either TAC-FI or Strat-FI, and they can range from the TAC-FIs about 400K to about 1.5 million, and then Strat-FIs are pretty big dollar amounts. They're 3 million to 15 million. Again, this is like another phase, and that can help the transition to finding longer term commercial fit. In addition, the DoD rolled out, I don't know, probably a month or two ago. It's called AppFit, and I'm going to kill the acronym, but basically it was $100 million to go to 10 companies, $10 million each, to help them with their transitional path. And that was a cool win. But one of the things I kind of griped a little bit about is I think with some basic reforms in the existing SBIR process, we could fund a lot more of those AppFit style programs where 10, 20, 30 companies every year essentially get to punch that ticket and get a good amount of money to lay in all the rest of the defense infrastructure that is required, clearances, running your software high side, having your facilities cleared, etc. Like these are all steps that make it slower and longer to work with the DoD, and just more expensive. So I think those programs are great. At the highest level, what would be very interesting to me is if the DoD, even when it's talking about this reform of overall acquisition, which takes 5 to 7 years or to do, we got to get away from that a little bit, right? And I think that's one area, but what it can do is just be more vocal and more integrated across the steps. So again, the program offices being the PEOs being tied closer to the In-Q-Tels, the DIUs, and the SBIR award winners, having a very robust conversation, making sure that people understand, yeah, these are our general directions. We're not committing all of our capital to it, but roughly this is what it looks like. I think that top-down directions and then getting bottom-up demand through open topics, through other programs like DIU, that will feed the funnel and make the investments that companies need to make to work with the DoD much more meaningful and kind of digestible. VCs will be, some VCs like to see SBIR awards, but I don't know that many VCs that like to see many of them. And so you really need to keep showing progress. And so, but I think that's a way to do it is kind of integrate some of the steps a little bit better, forecast and project what the needs will be in a more consumable method, not like a weird, not in the NDAA. Like that's not going to be the way to do it. I think you have to find channels to keep saying, hey, this is the thematic topic that's going to be important over 5 years. And then founders will say, okay, cool. I want to invest in that. I want to invest in putting the energy to be competitive in that space.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about SBIR mills, which you mentioned before. Just to break it up to people, what are they? What how do they exist? And why does the government let that happen?
Well, I mean, again, I think there's a little bit of an evolutionary path that got here, where the SBA and SBIRs were popular in the 80s and 90s. They said this is a thing that the government wants to invest in, small business. Let's go and do it. But if you look at the last 20 to 30 years of awards, you can look at the NSF and you see the NSF. I don't think any company or person has ever won more than 6 NSF awards at about $1 million to $1.5 million a pop. So that basically is your upward bound on this new cutting edge scientific research. If you look at the DoD, the numbers are very different. And there are, 20 to 30 companies that have taken on the order of like I think it's like $3.5 billion from the Department of Defense just in phase 1 and phase 2 SBIR contracts. And so what does that mean? That means companies are going back to the SBIR funds year in, year out, and they're getting, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars every year just to do some research. When I first started my analysis, I really tried to stay away from saying, hey, this is bad, because I didn't really know how much commercialization those companies had. Maybe they were building lots of amazing things. Maybe they were like, 100 people with all equivalent, the highest intelligent Google engineers, and they were just cranking through stuff. But part of the reason why these SBIR mills are called mills is they receive a lot of awards. Part of the reason there's disdain around them is the commercialization rate of many of these companies is pretty darn bad, meaning they are consuming these grant dollars year in, year out, and they are not delivering really meaningful technologies to the warfighter. And so, there are dozens of companies that have received individually more money than the, Andurils, the Vannevar Labs, I was at Primer. You can roll all of these companies up in the kind of new defense tech era, and they've received collectively way less money than individual companies that have been in the past. And so why does the DoD let this happen? Again, one thing, it's kind of take a little bit of slice of humble pie and say, frankly, the software world especially, but the tech world wasn't wanting to be that engaged with the DoD because it's so hard to get real contracts. And so some of the onus in the fight was on us. They needed, or the blame is to be on us. They needed things to get done, and they found people that were going to do it year in year, try things that would try this stuff year in, year out. And so, that's a reality that we face. What we're seeing over the last 5 years is many more companies are trying to engage with the Department of Defense. And so now we're shedding a little bit more of a light on these repeat awardees or mills and saying, like, wait a second, these guys are taking a huge chunk of the pie and they're not necessarily turning this stuff into cutting edge tech. Why would we even want them there? And so, I think part of it, again, the story is evolutional. Part of it is there's a belief that we are protecting the defense industrial base. And I spent a fair amount of time trying to understand, is that true? And the short answer is no. What you're seeing at most of the companies that are taking a lot of money year in, year out is they are not hiring more people. They are not hiring at a pace of Anduril. And yet they've received hundreds of millions of dollars more grant dollars through SBIR than Anduril ever had. What they are doing is they are existing as a small business, staying as a small business, operating as a small business that just consumes these dollars. And so, again, they weren't doing anything wrong, per se, but they weren't delivering the level of value that I think we should expect moving forward with small business trying to work with the government. And then there's other stuff. There was plenty of lobbying, and I saw a lot of that. There are stakeholders that tend to make a lot of money to keep the system the way it is today.
So, Ben, on that note, what's your take on all the advisors and consultants that are part of this process?
Well, I think they're serving a necessary function in the process that exists today. I don't quite equate them to an outsourced business team or sales group. I think that's it's a little bit different. Many of these advisory firms are ex-DoD procurement people that have a Rolodex of contacts that can help matchmake, right? And what they take in return is there's monthly retainers, usually somewhere $3,000 or $4,000 to $8,000. Maybe it's increased because of inflation. They can take equity stakes of your company, and in some cases, they take a portion of whatever dollars you receive through the SBIR. I think they can be really efficient for people that have never engaged with the DoD, like getting a phase 1 and then trying to find end customers that are going to sign off on that. Like, that's impossible. It's really, really hard to do unless the DoD has approached you first and said, this is amazing tech. Otherwise, you're never really going to be able to reach out to generals and say, hey, why don't you, learn about my cool software? That doesn't happen that often. unless you're from that community in that world. So I think they offer a value-added service. But what I kind of call out in the first post is you need to decide if those economics make sense for you upfront. Because $1.5 million is a lot of money until you have to spend a decent amount of it on managing the project, getting access to data in a different way that you may have not in the commercial sector, and potentially investing in one of these firms that's going to get you across the line. So it's not to say that it's not the right path forward, but I think people need to have their eyes wide open when they step into that forum.
Awesome. And then, so Congress recently passed the SBIR STTR Extension Act of 2022. What did it entail? What was the good, the bad, and the ugly that came out of it?
Yeah. So, it was an interesting process that I wasn't really intimately involved with until I just kind of happened to do that analysis and write the first blog. And then I got looped into it. What was on LinkedIn and Twitter and the media is this was, a program that is wildly successful for small business. And Senator Rand Paul was, trying to put a fork in it and let it die. But the reality is the critics and the detesters of what was the Extension Act were basically raising a hand and saying, hey, wait, one, what are we going to do about some national security risks around funding companies that have foreign investment, foreign, eyes on it. And there were some refinements. Senator Joni Ernst was trying to push for some tweaks to the overall Extension Act, and those went through and largely what she asked for. But then there was, the complaints that came out of Rand Paul's office were really more around abuse and waste of the system, which is, you can love or like or not care about Senator. There's things that are thematic there. But the asks of that group were really to address the mills that are taking year in, year out, somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 50% of the SBIR dollars from the DoD, and then many other agencies as well. These companies are making a lot of money and again, very questionable track records. So the good that came out of this bill, first of all, I think it ended up getting a lot of attention in the media at a time when questioning our defense tech sector was there. My contribution were a handful of blog articles, a couple things in Bloomberg, and some great memes. But I think part of what I was trying to represent is for the founder community, for the VC community, how would we think about this and some of the benefits? Not everyone has to agree with me, but what we saw that was good. Specifically to your question, open topics were mandated at an agency level, at least one batch of open topics for everyone. There were improvements made over trying to make at least some degree of the awards be distributed faster in a more meaningful way. And there were some national security concerns addressed. And then there were some steps to say, hey, if you win a lot of awards, you have to have higher degrees of commercialization than we've asked in the past. And I think this got a lot of sound bites that it was going to be an effective, useful thing to limit the largest abusers of the system, if you want to use that word, abusers or the SBIR mills. What I then did is I just said, well, okay, who's going to qualify in these cases? Because again, this data is all publicly available. And my analysis said, frankly, it's not going to impact that many firms. A handful of firms, 10-ish, that will potentially have to have slightly higher commercialization rates. And even in that case, the commercialization rates are pretty, not exciting. You're an investor, you wouldn't say, hey, that team has done exceedingly well. So that's where I think the good was that there were some steps put in place. It was limited to 3 years as a reauthorization period. It was going to be at least 5. And so I think the positives are also that people are just going to have more eyes. They're going to see how open topics play out over this next few years in terms of the number of companies that are going to be receiving dollars. I think you will see that jump. But all in all, the mills themselves were kind of not really impacted. And so there is obviously a lot of lobbying by a few groups that stand to gain benefit by not kind of quashing this activity. And so that's where some of the reforms that I was a big proponent of. I tried to do objective analysis on appropriate thresholds that how I would consider capping some of these firms. That didn't get through, at least not this time around.
Incredible. And Ben, maybe to kind of draw this to a close, are there any other recommendations that you think that people in the government, people that have influence on this, should be really taking a look at that we have not covered in depth today?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as this sounds like a real critique of the program, I think this could be a wildly valuable program, an incubator for defense tech. I think that if venture capitalists and their portfolio companies get a better sense of what it is and what it's not, I think there are strategies that our world can take to improve success. It's understanding the pathways from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, those likelihood of winning, you want to understand it. It's having relationships with advisory firms, maybe even at a VC level. There are examples of that ex-DoD folks that have their own VCs, and there are a handful of really smart folks working in that space. But I think we have to say, look, are we going to work with the government? We have to have some collective knowledge to go and engage. So I think those, I think as much as I kind of have given a tough lens on some of this, I think those companies, I think founders need to have an eye looking forward and saying that gov tech and defense tech is an area where they can make money. Now, how does the SBIR facilitate that? I would move much more to the NSF model. Open topics at any time of the year. If you have cool tech, knock on a door. We're going to make the application process simple. We're going to remove barriers of friction for your companies to engage with us. And then we're going to have steps lined up along the way. So I think the relationship still needs to change and mature overall. In terms of other things that I would recommend, I would really put strong caps around engaging with the SBIR program. No company, companies like Qualcomm have received money. Companies of Anduril have received money, but they're not dependent on the sugar that is SBIR. They've gone off, they've commercialized on their own. I think we have to really basically say, look, this is a program. It is not a program of record. And so you're not going to be dependent on it forever. And you're going to get kicked out at some point. If you did kind of what I was recommending in terms of caps, basically, I think that it's something of around 8 phase 1s a year, 4 phase 2s, and then a combination of a strat-fi, tac-fi. That's going to fill the pipeline of the great majority of any company, period, in terms of their workload and what they can do for the DoD. And it's also going to open up a couple $100 million every year for new companies to engage or to stand up these other programs like AppFit. And so I think that is, I would still push that idea of caps, whether it's total dollars or annual allotments. And I think you'll see a real phase shift in the amount of technologies and founders and defense space engaging with the overall DoD right now.
Fantastic. And Ben, maybe do you want to just give a quick plug on, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you? And also, I know we haven't talked about this today, but would love if you could just give a brief overview of what you're doing now at Yurts.
Yeah. So people can contact me. My LinkedIn profiles out there in the world. I do have a Substack email address, Ben at Yurts. I'm going to get a lot of crazy spam now, I suppose. So they can contact me through those channels. Happy to discuss. I will continue to write on some different topics that are in the AI and policy and defense space. There's a lot of really cool things happening. I've stopped writing about it for a few months because I did start a company called Yurts that we're really focused on building out a developer platform for companies that want to engage with these next generation of foundational models. I think that there are incredible opportunities and there's a ton of potential right now that is starting to be unleashed by the foundational models, the GPTs, the OPTs, the Whisper, the stability diffusion. But we haven't yet, as a country or as a tech sector, made them highly consumable, accessible, built with the right form factors for business use cases. And so what we are working on is trying to build that platform so software developers and companies have better ways to engage and work with these large foundational models.
Incredible. Ben, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate being here.